major was people warning me that philosophy sways you away from Christianity and is almost anti-Christian.
If you think Christianity is true, it's going to, in the end, provide the most comprehensive answers to those questions.
And you reinterpreted addiction in a way of Christianity and in philosophy.
Most of the literature on addiction treats it either as a purely medical problem or as a purely moral problem in the sense that it's just a failure. I was pretty convinced that that was too simplistic, and so my book was an attempt to say...
Dr. Kent Dunnington holds a Ph.D. from Texas A&M University, along with a Master of Theological Studies from Duke University Divinity School. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Philosophy and Religion from Southern Nazarene University. His book, Addiction and Virtue, Beyond the Models of Disease and Choice, challenges the two dominant ways addiction is typically understood, as either a disease or simply a matter of personal choice. Drawing on thinkers like Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, he offers a deeper philosophical and theological framework for understanding addiction. At Biola, he is the head of the philosophy department and teaches classes such as humility, pride, and Christian virtue theories. He recently finished a book on gratitude called Gratitude to God, the Heart of Christian Formation. And most importantly, he has a bulldog.
From the Torch Podcast Network, welcome to Office Hours, your professors unmasked. Office Hours is where real people wrestle with real questions. Hi, I'm your host, Jae Koo. So today we're with a very, very special guest, a personally biased guest, because as a philosophy major, but we have our philosophy professor, Dr. Kent Dunnington. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Jay. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much for coming here too. It really means a lot when professors like you come help us out and just have a word with us and just get to know you better. So
I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, so just before we dive into the good stuff, I just want to do some ice-breaking stuff with you. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself for me and the audience?
Sure. So yes, my name is Kent Dunnington. I've been here at Biola for 10 years, but I am not a California native. I grew up in the Midwest in Kansas and went to school in Oklahoma, went to grad school in Texas and North Carolina, and then I was actually visiting Biola about 10 years ago on a fellowship and met some of the philosophy professors here, and we really connected. And so when they had a job opening, I decided to apply, and have been here for 10 years now.
Let's go. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing about that. I also want to hear your faith journey. So how did you come into faith?
Oh, this could be a long story, so let me think about how to shorten it. So I grew up in the church, very much in the church. Both of my grandfathers were pastors, and very conservative church, a denomination that actually no longer exists. Oh. But it was in some ways a kind of anti-intellectual tradition. And so when I got to college, I found myself with lots of questions. I think part of the reason I was drawn to philosophy was I discovered that philosophers dealt with the questions that I sort of naturally had about the truth of Christian claims and theistic claims. And so I actually went through a period of pretty significant doubt and even decided I was no longer a Christian after college. And then my journey back to faith and back to God was happened when I was in graduate school. And some of it was intellectual. It had to do with reading philosophy of religion and really becoming convinced that Christianity was as intellectually defensible as any alternative worldview. But then a lot of it had to do with matters of the heart. So I started going back to church, which was really hard for me at first. I didn't like to be there. But I started to sort of experience the Christian love of people in the church in a way that was more and more undeniable. And I still remember waking up one morning and realizing that I believed that Jesus had been resurrected, and so I was a Christian again. And so that was 25 years ago now.
Yeah, that's an amazing testimony. It's very interesting, how you're intellectually just studying philosophy, but you came from a background where they treated Christianity like with less of that as you're doing right now, and that's a very, I can imagine you have a very interesting dynamic of your life and your intellectual journey, and that's very interesting to hear. Yeah, so beyond the faith, I also want to learn about your academic background and your journey to becoming a professor. Can you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
that?
When I went to college, I had no intention of studying philosophy. Didn't even know that was a possibility. I don't think I'd ever heard the word philosophy. I wanted to be a doctor, and so I was pre-med, and then I ended up having a couple of experiences shadowing my dad, who was a surgeon, and passed out once while watching him do surgery, passed out another time on grand rounds with him. And I thought, maybe this isn't for me. Plus, I had taken these philosophy classes, and I loved them. So in some ways, I drifted into philosophy just because it was what I loved. I did not even know that graduate school was an option. I was the first philosophy major at my college in like 12 years. It was not until my senior year that I even learned that there was anything called graduate school. So, but I ended up going, and then really liking it. There was a certain point when I went to seminary, I was thinking about wondering if I was called to be a pastor. So even at that point, I wasn't still sure I was going to stay in academics. But it was really at seminary at Duke where I became confident that I wasn't really fit to be a pastor. That wasn't where I would be best suited, and that I was really well suited to be a professor. And I feel so blessed and lucky, really, that I found this work. I get to do for my job what I'd probably want to be doing, even if it wasn't a job.
Right. I mean, we also feel very blessed to have you as a first professor here.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you.
As someone who took your classes, and I'm sure a lot of Biola students will take your logic classes too for gen eds or intro to philosophy. It's just been a very different class in such a great way, where it's very, your just vibe is very mellow, and then you just peacefully just start thinking about greater things. And I think, I just personally had experiences of you opening that up to us. So just thank you for being a professor here.
Thanks, Jay.
And then just moving on from the journey, I'm really interested in your actual works, because you have studied addiction, and you reinterpreted addiction in like a way of Christianity and in philosophy.
Yes.
And maybe even gave a solution to it. So could you please tell us more about that? And your book, his book is called Addiction and Virtue.
Sure. So that was my first book, and it came out of my doctoral dissertation. And my doctoral dissertation was really focused on Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, and on what's called virtue theory. And so it was focused on the process whereby people develop virtues like courage or temperance or humility. And the more I learned about the formation of virtues and the nature of habits, which is really what virtues are, the more I started to think about addiction through that lens. And I had become interested in addiction in part because when I was in graduate school for philosophy, my mentor had been a recovering alcoholic. And he invited me to AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And so I would occasionally attend with him. And I was really fascinated and drawn to those settings, because these are settings in which people are extremely vulnerable and raw about the brokenness of their lives, and yet they find, by gathering together and becoming vulnerable with one another about their struggles, that they are able to find their way into recovery, often amazing stories. So I was really interested in what's going on there, and most of the literature on addiction treats it either as a purely medical problem, so it's sort of a biological disease, or as a purely moral problem in the sense that it's just a failure of character or something like that. And I was pretty convinced that that was too simplistic, and so my book was an attempt to say there's a little bit more going on than either of those really simple models. And I used the categories of habit, virtue, and vice to try to think through what really an addiction is.
I see. What is it? Could you give us maybe like a as if you're teaching a 5-year-old, because that's
Sure.
maybe that's a hard question because it's a philosophy text. But maybe if it's something where we can grab an essence of it for all the audience here.
Sure. So I think one way to, so I could say a couple of things. I'll approach it from a couple angles. One is that one of the most puzzling things about addiction is that people say paradoxical or maybe even contradictory things about it. So on the one hand, it's very common to say that people who have an addiction or who are addicted are powerless over their addiction. On the other hand, it's very common to say that people recover from their addictions. Well, how are those two things possible? How is it possible that someone is genuinely powerless to do anything about their addiction, and yet they find that through certain strategies, they're able to overcome their addictions? I think there's a sense in which that same paradox shows up with any kind of serious habit, right? So if you think about, for example, a bad habit, right? Like overeating or something like that, a tendency to overeat. There is a real sense in which once the habit is deeply ingrained, people feel like they've lost their freedom over an important domain of their life. But there's also a sense in which, even though in the moment they often don't have the willpower to overcome it, there are strategies that they can undertake to rehabituate themselves and to escape what feels like a kind of prison. So that's a sense in which addiction looks an awful lot like a habit. It has to do with a loss of control that can only be regained through a process of rehabituating. Another thing that I would say is important about understanding addiction as a habit is we talk about how bad addictions are a lot, and they ruin people's lives. But the thing that thinking about addiction as a habit makes you ask is, what's it good for? Because every habit that we have, we develop because it helps us do something that we want to do. So even something as simple as your habitual ability to tie your shoe, the reason that you made that into a habit is so you didn't have to spend 20 minutes thinking about it every morning like you did when you were a kid. Now you can do it effortlessly and thoughtlessly. And what makes our lives even possible is that we develop all these habits that allow us to do complicated and difficult things with ease. Well, addiction is like that too. Addiction is a major habit because it actually allows us to accomplish some things that human beings need. And the book is about what all those things are, but I'll just give one quick example. So one of the things that we need in our lives is an organizing principle. We have lots of stuff going on, so many demands over our time, and it's often very hard to figure out how those things all tie together. One nice thing about addiction, one thing that addiction does is it gives you an overarching purpose and allows you to rank order other things in your life depending on how well they allow you to pursue your addiction. So actually people who have serious addictions have a type of order and coherence to their lives that many of us struggle to find. Of course, it's a damaging order and eventually it destroys them. But part of the reason that addiction is so powerful as a habit is because it actually allows humans to achieve things that they desperately want to achieve.
I see. I think it's so fascinating how you sort of find this little bit of light within that darkness, and you somehow figure out a way to turn that light, which is the habit, turn that light into like using that exact same thing that maybe failed you to overcome that boundary, and so building into better habits and stuff like that. Yeah, I can imagine like someone has a smoking addiction versus me. I don't constantly try to not smoke. It's just not even a temptation for me because I just don't have that habit in me, and it's more, Yeah, it sounds like you're saying it's more of like, more than just, oh, I'm not going to do this. It's more like making yourself into a person that doesn't even think about it at
That's
all.
exactly right. The way they put it in Alcoholics Anonymous is that recovery is not about learning how to not drink. Recovery is about learning how to live sober. So it has to do with not just getting the willpower to say no to the thing you want to do, but actually developing a different way of life and a different pattern of habits that eventually, the hope is, causes you to even lose the overwhelming desire to drink or smoke or whatever the addiction you struggle with is.
Yeah. How is it interpreted differently when we put a Christian perspective on it?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that we might want to say about that is that as Christians, we believe in sin. And so one of the things I try to puzzle through in the book is, what is the connection between addiction and sin? And I try to argue in the book that there is a lot of overlap, although the two are not synonymous at all. For instance, it's possible to be addicted in a way that doesn't involve any sin at all. I mean, if you think, for example, about a child who's born with fetal alcohol syndrome and who, because of their environment, encounters alcohol at a young age, doesn't know any better and becomes addicted. It's hard to locate, at least, it's hard to describe their addictive behaviors as sinful in any straightforward way. On the other hand, obviously there are all kinds of cases of sin that are not addictive. They're not addictions, right? I mean, we sin all the time in ways that don't mean that we're addicted. So there is an overlap there. But I think in some ways the way in which we think about addiction differently, given our Christian faith, is in some ways the tragedy of addiction is illuminated the more it contrasts with what we take to be the nature of human flourishing. So if we have a Christian picture of flourishing, which is a life filled with love of neighbor and love of God, with a profound sense of freedom, meaning, so on and so forth, then set against that Christian picture of flourishing, a life of addiction becomes clearly tragic and lamentable. Whereas, suppose you had a simply secular sense of flourishing, where it just has to do with something as basic as, say, physical health, right? You can still probably diagnose addiction as a bad place to be, but it's not going to be nearly as tragic as it looks if you contrast it with what Christian flourishing looks like. So in some ways, I think Christian flourishing gives us the picture of health that allows us to most adequately diagnose all of the ways in which addiction is a form of sickness.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It's a very interesting reflection, because I guess all humans are addicted to sin now, eventually, and it can see like an overlap in there.
That's right, and that's a really nice comment, Jay. If you think about the Apostle Paul, when he talks about, and he's complaining, really sort of desperately saying, why is it that I do the thing I don't want to do, right? That's his characterization of sin that sounds a lot like addiction, right? So for Paul, sin is not just occasionally doing a bad thing, but it's having a kind of internal habituation away from the good. And so there are all these overlaps, and many people have thought that addiction is actually the best metaphor we have for sin. So if you're trying to introduce someone who doesn't really know anything about Christian categories to the category of sin, many people think, well, if they understand what addiction is, you can help them understand what sin is, because sin is just a general posture of habituation toward things that entrap us and turn us away from the good and that sort of thing.
Wow, that's your the study that you did. It's just amazing. It can also be a way for Christians to be helped on their journey of sin too, I guess. And this is a very, very interesting concept that didn't even think about getting from an addiction book. So, so 2 in 1 right there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's such a counterintuitive way of how the modern world thinks about addiction, like as you were saying, and it's very, very interesting. I would love to hear about how me or students or audiences can practically apply that in our lives. Is there anything, maybe if someone's struggling with addiction, what would you tell them?
Yeah, well, I would want to first understand what's going on, right? So it's very difficult to begin to think about recovery if you don't have some insight into what your addictive behavior or substance of choice is doing for you. So I'd want to talk to the person and make sure they understand why they do it, right? Is it a form of self-medication? Is it an attempt to deal with some sort of extreme trauma that needs to be addressed in some way? But once we get that stuff sorted out, then I suppose I would want to say that a couple of things tend to be absolutely essential for recovery. There's a lot of evidence that shows that the brain needs at least a month of abstinence to begin to rewire the reward pathways in the brain. So anyone who's had any kind of dependence on a substance like coffee or anything like that knows that when you stop drinking it, you feel really bad, right? And of course, one of the things that makes it so hard to recover from addiction is that period of dysphoria, of extreme discomfort, is so painful that you tend to want to do whatever you can to get out of it. So I would want to say the only way out of this is like a month of pain. You got to be ready to suffer. And it's going to be really uncomfortable, but amazing things happen to our brain if we can abstain from drugs or certain addictive behaviors for a month. Our brain can actually rewire in a way that we become capable again of experiencing pleasure and peace without the substance. So you got to get a month of abstinence, and that often involves white knuckling, right? But then beyond that, what you need is a community and a set of practices that allows you to build a different way of life. It's extremely hard to recover from addiction by yourself. You need a community. That might just be your Christian friends. It might be joining a 12-step program if you struggle with alcohol, joining AA. If you struggle with drugs, joining NA. If you struggle with sex addiction, joining Sex Addiction Anonymous. Hopefully the church is also a place that people can go to recover, and there are programs in churches like Celebrate Recovery. But you need a community where you can be radically honest about what you're doing, what your temptations are, why you do it. And if you put together a month of abstinence and a community around you where you can talk honestly about your struggles, you start to have the tools that you need to begin to recover.
Yeah, there was a very practical take on it. You have sophisticated steps like that 1 month of breaking your habit and creating a new one, and then that sense of community. I think that's something that we can totally just apply to it in our everyday lives. It's a real tutorial in just how to philosophically overcome this addiction problem. I'm not saying it's easy or anything, but it's I was just really fascinated about the actual practical process of it, and it's just really appreciative of how you studied that for us, maybe for the world.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's helpful.
I do want to move on to another text that you have been studying. You mentioned that it's going to be coming out in May, and it's about gratitude. So
Yes.
how just reshaping or how we thought of what gratitude was, maybe. I'll let you do the talking. But as Christians who are called to be grateful, I would love to hear more on what you have for us today.
Sure. So the book came about because I've struggled with gratitude to God, and if you've ever known someone who is an especially grateful person and has a relationship of deep gratitude to God, you know that there's a kind of joy that they have that is enviable. And as I describe in the book, my grandmother was the person for me who was the kind of paragon or the model of what it looks like to live in like a posture of gratitude to God. My grandmother is just always talking about how good God has been to her and how she can't believe how generous God has been. Sometimes, she gets teary-eyed, and so kind of, and what that means is that she really experiences like every day of her life as a gift. And what a joy that would be to experience your life. It's fun to get gifts, right? And if you undergo your life as a gift in the posture of gratitude, you are you're gonna experience a lot of joy and peace. And there's all these studies in social psychology research about how people who have high levels of gratitude have better health, they sleep better, they have less depression, they live longer, all this amazing stuff. Well, the thing that really interested me was the difference between being grateful to other people and being grateful to God. Because in my own experience, I was pretty good at noticing the good things that other people did for me and experiencing and expressing gratitude for them. But I really struggled to consistently experience and express gratitude to God, and I was puzzled about that. So the initial push to write the book came from this basic question: why is it that someone like me, who's generally speaking a pretty grateful guy, struggles so much to be consistently grateful to God? So the book is about why that is, and what I end up arguing is that the reason is because God is so strange. God is not like the other people in our lives who benefit us. As I put it in the book, God is a strange giver who gives strange gifts. I mean, to just give one example, God gives us the gift of our own existence. But that's a really weird gift, because most of the time when you receive a gift, there's someone who receives the gift, and there's the gift itself that passes from the giver to the receiver. But if my own existence is the gift, I'm not there yet to receive it, right? So how does that even make sense? So if you think one of God's biggest, probably arguably the biggest gift that God gives us, doesn't even fit within the standard structure of a giver giving a gift to a recipient. And in the book, I explore a lot of different ways in which God's generosity to us doesn't fit the normal pattern. And I think that's part of the reason that we struggle so much with gratitude. And so then the positive part of the book is an exploration really of biblical gratitude, and particularly the practice of biblical thanksgiving, and how that can retrain us to see God's gifts more readily, to respond more enthusiastically to them, and that sort of thing. So the book, I hope, is really practical, and I even talk about things like gratitude journaling and very practical things that can help us grow in our ability to see and experience God's gifts to us.
Oh, that's, well, you already sold me on that. I'm definitely ordering that book when it comes out.
All right.
It's a very, practically approaching gratitude upon the reconsideration of, like, it's a weird phenomenon where God gives to us because it's logically incoherent to what we can understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. Yeah, one way to put it is logically incoherent. The way I end up putting in the book is that if God, what we really need to do is reconceive the very nature of gift in order to accommodate what we know to be God's gifts to us. But if we hold on to our standard expectations about what gift giving looks like, we're liable to miss God's gifts. And so the book is about really reframing our notion of what a good gift even is.
So just starting from the foundation, it's getting starting over on our project of finding what gratitude is. And, I wish that book can take me to that journey too. I'm really excited. That's an interesting topic.
Great.
Yeah. So I also want to talk a little about your work in prison. So you have experiences of teaching in prison.
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then how does teaching philosophy work in prison? How is it different, and maybe what did you learn from it?
Yeah. So this part of my story happened at the last school that I was at in Illinois. I taught at a school there called Greenville University, and it's in a small town of 6,000 people in rural Illinois. And shortly after moving there, I realized there's a giant federal prison on the outskirts of town. And my grandfather, I mentioned him earlier, he'd been a pastor, he also had taught, he led Bible studies and taught theology in Leavenworth State Penitentiary in Kansas. And I remember him coming home and telling stories about these guys that he had taught, and even meeting some of the prisoners after they got out who stayed in relationship with him. So I was always sort of fascinated by it. So I decided when I was at my last job, I'm going to go get a tour of this prison, which I did. And I asked them when I was there, is there anything we can do to help you? We're at this local university, how can we help you? And the person who's taking me on the tour said, we get a lot of Christians in here leading Bible studies, but we don't ever get anyone helping us with education. So I started going and tutoring the inmates who were trying to get their GED, and then started bringing in a bunch of my students to do it. And then eventually some of the guys that we got to know, they said, hey, Prof, you think you could teach us some philosophy? So we started reading these books together. Then I decided, I'll just teach them a legit class. So the very first class I taught them was Introduction to Logic.
Oh,
and
quite a choice.
And they loved it. And then they loved to argue with the guards, and identify logical fallacies and things like that. And they did so well. Very often folks who are in prison are really smart, and they're extremely savvy and insightful, and you put difficult ideas in front of them and they relish it. And so this classroom setting, the prison classroom setting, was the most invigorating, challenging, fun teaching I've ever done. Eventually, we managed to get the university that I taught at to give them credit, so that the students in the prison could leave when they got out of prison. They would leave with a bunch of credits they could transfer to a junior college or a four-year college. And it was a beautiful thing, and I'm still in contact with a bunch of the guys that I used to teach, and they're out now, and some of them have got on and gotten their degrees and everything. So yeah, it was an amazing experience.
That sounds like a movie.
Yeah.
That's as a CMA major, I can think of a strip coming out.
I think there have been a couple movies like that, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's just an amazing story that you shared for us today. Thank you. Was there anything that you might have learned from the prisoners?
Oh, I learned so much. One of the things that comes to mind, so it was really interesting because we, in the prison setting that I was in, most of the inmates that I was working with were African American, and many of them had converted first to Nation of Islam and then to Islam. So one of the big things that I learned from them is I learned a lot about Islam, and we ended up reading books together. For instance, we read one book on the difference between what Christians believe about Jesus and what Muslims believe about Jesus. And of course, I hoped that my time with them might help them understand Christian faith more. But also in the process, it really helped me understand and have, I think, a deeper respect for Islam and the way that Islam had really changed these guys' lives and given them a sort of sense of structure and order, a deep, profound confidence in a transcendent God. Of course, I think they're wrong about some really important stuff, but they gave me a deep regard, I think, for Islam.
I see. Yeah, this widening up of perspectives.
Exactly.
People that we might never interact with. And it's just,
exactly.
Yeah, that just seems like a very meaningful time to have, just listening to different stories and how their life was changed virtuously and stuff like that too. So,
it was, yeah.
Yeah. That's really, really amazing. Yeah, and then as a philosophy professor, philosophy meaning the love of wisdom, you studied for wisdom for a big portion of your life. So I do really wish you would teach us a little bit about how to be wise. Maybe a question can be, habits help cultivate virtues like humility, gratitude, honesty, these things that you've been talking about?
Well, the thing that comes to my mind when I think about how to be wise is Socrates. And, Socrates is sort of he's not the first philosopher, but he's the model for what a philosopher is and for how the philosophical life can be a life of wisdom. And you may remember, Jay, that in the Apology, Socrates sort of explains what he thinks wisdom is. And he says that maybe some people have what he calls a superhuman kind of wisdom, where they actually know all of the answers to all the most important questions. But he says, I don't have that. And yet, if you remember from the story, he was told that he was the wisest man in all of Athens. So he's sort of trying to puzzle this out. Like, how can I be wise if I don't even know the answers to all the hard questions? Well, then he says that must be that there's another kind of wisdom that comes from actually knowing what you don't know. And he discovered when he went around and talked to other people in Athens that they thought they knew the answers to these questions, but when they offered the answers and he asked them follow-up questions, they got confused. So he said, here are these people that think they know, but they don't know. Maybe I'm wiser than them because I know I don't know. So I suppose what I would say if someone said, how do I become wise? I would say, get really comfortable admitting what you don't know. Lean into that. Because every time you can be really honest about what you don't know, you put yourself in a position to actually learn. Whereas if you keep insisting that you know when you don't know, you block yourself from learning. So that's why humility is so central to wisdom. Without humility, there is no wisdom.
I see. That's the basis of how one can learn and eventually flourish. It's a very, very, very insightful message that I'll take in. And,
well, you already have, Jay.
Hopefully. Hopefully I do. But yeah, just for a general context, Apologies was the trial that Socrates was in. Well, he was accused of disrupting the gods and the youths during that time. So they were trying to kill him, and Apologies was him trying to explain himself, which didn't work out. But
yeah, didn't go so well for him.
Yeah. Preconception that we have in the world that I've been hearing a lot as I was trying to commit to a philosophy major was people warning me that philosophy sways you away from Christianity and it's almost anti-Christian. As a Christian philosopher, I want to hear your take on it and what we might be able to think on this topic.
Yeah. Well, there's a sense in which that's clearly happened, and there's a sense in which philosophy can be corrosive to faith, and this isn't just a recent problem. You can even think about the Apostle Paul talking about vain philosophy, or you might remember that when Paul preached to the Athenians, rather than converting to faith, they all said, oh, that's really interesting, let's talk more about it tomorrow, right? So it is true that philosophy can become a kind of overly rationalistic enterprise that distances us from matters of the heart. But I don't think it needs to be that. And in fact, if you think that philosophy is simply an honest pursuit of the deepest truths, the truths that matter most, questions about whether God exists and whether human beings have souls and whether there's an afterlife and whether we have free will and whether we can know anything. If you think Christianity is true, right, then you think that it's going to, in the end, provide the most comprehensive answers to those questions. And so, especially I would say in the last 40 to 50 years, there's been a huge resurgence of Christian philosophy to the point that now, if you went to, say, a big research university, the department in the university where you'd be most likely to find Christians, people of faith who are very open about their faith, probably would now be philosophy departments. And it seems to me that that's as it should be. I mean, the greatest philosophers in human history have all been theists, many of them Christian. And so to me, there's actually a deep partnership between the life of faith and the life of philosophy.
I see. Yeah, I love how you simplified it into, if it's just about pursuing the truth, then eventually, if you do it the right way, then it would lead to God, I guess. And
that's exactly what Simone Weil, this philosopher, said. If Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, then if you pursue the truth honestly, eventually you'll fall into Jesus' arms. That's how she put it.
Awesome. Yeah, and then tying that with the lesson of humility you gave when you listen to theories of like temptations or things that may sway away from you, that sounds very convincing. You can take a step of humility and be like, yeah, like I know God's more than just this. So going out to researching, getting office hours with Dr. Ken Dunnington to ask about these things, and just being very investigative and invested in that with humility. I think it's just be a very fascinating way where all your teachings kind of come together.
Yeah, that's one of the joys of teaching at Biola. Really, is that I think Biola has created this environment where students are committed to the life of faith, but they feel enough freedom to ask hard questions about it and to talk about their doubts or to raise difficult questions in a classroom setting. And it's just, man, that's like the best thing about Biola is that this is a place where you can actively pursue your faith and ask any questions that you have in a really open, free setting.
I see. Yeah, I'm really, just you mentioning that as a Biola student, I think we do have that kind of environment. It's a blessing opportunity that God gave us.
I think we do, yeah.
So unfortunately, although I want to talk to you for 8 hours, we are coming to the time where we do have to wrap up. So I just want to ask you like one final fun question on, it's a office hours tradition where we ask, what is one object, your favorite object that we can find in your office if we get office hours with you?
Oh, yes. The thing that comes instantly to my mind is a painting of a giraffe named Ginger that my daughter did when she was in 2nd or 3rd grade. And it's right by my door, so I say hi to Ginger every time I leave the office. And it's just a painting that cheers me up and makes me smile.
That's awesome. If you ever go to his office, please check out Ginger.
Yeah, come say hi to Ginger.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for making time for us today, Dr. Dunnington. I think there are so many things that we can take out from this session that I'll definitely try to apply it to my life, both intellectually and practically. So just want to express my gratitude in that. And we will wrap up our office hour podcast with Dr. Kent Dunnington.
Thank you, Jeff.